the UNRWA that is faced in these difficult circumstances after having 71 years of having the UNRWA and providing services to the Palestinian refugees amidst difficult circumstances. At this forum, I would like to welcome Mr. Ali Huwaidi, the president of the institution O2, Mr. Amania Abiy, the manager of Syria, Mr. Claudio Cordone, the manager of field office in Lebanon, Ms. Marta Lorenzo, the manager of the Jordan region, Mr. Matthias Shamali, the manager of Gaza,
والسيد الأستاذ سوني جادنتر هو نائب المديرة في منطقة أو في إقليم الضفة الغربية. وفي البداية أكون مع كلمات السيد علي هويدي مدير الهيئة
Huwaidi, the manager of the 302 institution. Mr. Ali, the mic is yours.
طيب بانتظار أن يسمعني أستاذ علي.
We await Mr. Ali to hear us.
المدراء الحاضرون سيتحدثون عن التحديات التي تواجه كل مدير في الإقليم الذي يعمل فيه في ظل الأزمة المالية الحادة التي تواجه وكالة الأونروا والتراجع في تقديم الخدمات كما ونوعا وتأثير ذلك على الأوضاع الاقتصادية والاجتماعية للاجئين الفلسطينيين وعلى الموظفين وعلى مستقبل الوكالة وعن الفرص المتاحة والخطط والبرامج التي يعمل عليها كل مدير لتجاوز هذه الأزمة. نبقى مع كلمة الأستاذ علي هويدي.
Now we leave you with the word of Mr. Ali Huwaidi, the president of 302.
شكرا لك دكتورة انتصار. ضيوفنا الأكارم كلهم باسمه وصفته ولقبه ومن يمثل نرحب بكم أجمل ترحيب كما نرحب بمتابعينا الأعزاء أينما كانوا. السلام عليكم
Peace, mercy of Allah, the Almighty, be upon all of you. What does it mean for 167 respective countries to vote to the United Nations General Assembly to extend UNRWA's mandate for 3 new years ending in June 2023? This happened after the agency was exposed to the fierce targeting and defamation campaign by the American administration and the Israeli occupation state, and within 4 years of President Trump's era, the most prominent of which was the cut of the annual financial contribution to the agency's fund of $360 million from 2018, and the claim that the agency is corrupt and anti-Semitic and that it inflates the numbers of refugees and others. What does it mean for the UNRWA Advisory Committee to meet twice a year to discuss the status of UNRWA, which is made up of 301 members from 28 countries and 3 observers from the Arab League, the European Union, the State of Palestine, and says that the UNRWA is an essential humanitarian need for more than 6 million registered Palestinian refugees and a security and stability component in the region. Yesterday, the Conference of Supervisors of Palestinian Affairs in the World in the Arab countries held its 150th session and also affirmed its support for the UNRWA. And what does it mean for the UNRWA to evaluate the MOPAN?
المكونة من 18 دولة بما فيها
consisting of 18 countries
وتصدر
including America, which will issue its report on June 10,
2019.
وجزء من التقييم
يثني على إدارة الأونروا القوية وهيكلها التنظيم المرن
flexible organizational structure, strategic vision, and the effectiveness of its provision of its services. And what does it mean for the United Nations Secretary General Guterres to always talk about his permanent support for the UNRWA, for the United Nations to stand by it and call on donor countries to cover its financial deficit? First of all, this means that the fate of the future of UNRWA is determined by the United Nations General Assembly only,
أيضاً
not anyone
هناك
else.
دعم معنوي
And it also
وسياسي
means
دولي
theoretically
ساحق
that
للوكالة.
there is
ولكن
overwhelming
يبقى السؤال
international
الجوهري:
moral and political
لماذا
support
لا
for the agency.
يترجم هذا
But
الدعم
the
السياسي
fundamental question
والمعنوي
remains,
إلى
why
التخلص
does
من
this
الأزمة
political and
المالية
moral
المزمنة
support is not
للوكالة إلى غير
translated
رجعة،
into getting rid
وكذلك
of the
توسيع
financial
سياسة عمل
crisis of
الأونروا.
the
يدرك
agency and
المجتمع
further expand
الدولي
its work
الذي أنشأ
policy.
الوكالة في العام
The international
49
community which
وبعد
established the
72
agency
سنة
in
هي عمر النكبة،
1949 and
لأن
after
الظروف
72 years
والمعطيات
which is the
المحيطة
age of the
باللاجئين
Nakba
الفلسطينيين
is aware that the
ووكالة
conditions and
الأونروا قد
circumstances
تغيرت.
surrounding Palestinian refugees
عندما
and UNRWA
أنشئت
have
وكالة
changed.
الأونروا
When
اتخذت
the
صفة
UNRWA
المؤقت
was established,
على
it
اعتبار بأنه
assumed the status
سيصار
of
إلى عودة
temporary,
اللاجئين
considering that
الفلسطينيين
the return
وفق
of the
قرار الأمم
Palestinian
رقم
refugees would take
194
place in accordance
بتاريخ
with the UN
ديسمبر
Resolution number
1948
194 of December
الذي أكد على
1948,
حق
which
العودة
affirmed
والتعويض
right to
واستعادة
return
الممتلك.
and compensation and
وانبثقت هذا القرار
restitution
لجنة
of
التوفيق
property.
الدولية حول
The International
فلسطين
Conciliation
UNCCP
Committee on the
المكونة من
Palestinians
أمريكا وتركيا
UNCCP consisting
وفرنسا،
of America,
وكانت
Turkey and
مهمتها
France
بالإضافة
emerged
إلى
from the
توفير
decision
الحماية
and its
القانونية
ambition in
والجسدية
addition to
والإنسانية
providing legal,
للاجئين،
physical
وضع
and
برنامج
humanitarian protection
وآليات
for
لعودة
refugees
اللاجئين
was
إلى
to set up a
بيوتهم
program
بما
and
يشمل
mechanisms
كل
for the
اللاجئين
return of refugees
الفلسطينيين
to
في
their
العالم.
homes,
ولكن
including all
جرى
Palestinian
تعطيل
refugees in
عمل
the world.
هذه
But
اللجنة
work of the
منذ مطلع
committee has been
خمسينيات العام
suspended
الماضي،
since the
على الرغم
beginning
من
of the
أنها لا
50s
تزال موجودة
of
في
the
الأمم
last
المتحدة
century,
وتقدم
despite
تقريرها
its
السنوي
existence
في بداية
until the
شهر
moment,
سبتمبر
and it
من
submits
كل
its
عام.
report to the General
وبناء على
Assembly at the
تعنت
beginning of
دولة
September every
الاحتلال
year.
الإسرائيلي
And
واعتبار
based on
حق
the
العودة
intransigence
للاجئين
of
من
the Israeli
المحرمات،
occupation and
استمر عمل
considering
الوكالة
the
حتى
right
يومنا
of
هذا.
return of the
أضف
refugees as
إلى
a taboo,
ذلك بأن
the
عملية
agency's work
تمويل
continued to this
الأونروا مع
day.
بداية
In addition to
نشأتها
that,
تكون طوعية
when the beginning
كانت
of its
مقبولة،
inception, the
إذ كانت
funding process of
مترافقة مع
UNRWA to be
مفهوم أن وكالة الأونروا
voluntary
هي وكالة
was
مؤقتة
acceptable as it was
وسينتهي
accompanied
دورها
by the
قريبا
concept
مع
that
عودة
UNRWA is
اللاجئين.
a temporary
ولكن
agency. Its
بقي
role will
التمويل
soon
حتى يومنا
end
هذا
with the
طوعيا
return of the refugees,
ويخضع أحيانا
but funding
لشروط
has
الممول.
remained and
جاءت
to this day
الوكالة
voluntary
وفقا
and sometimes subject to the
بأن
conditions of
تكون
the
خدماتها محصورة فقط باللاجئين
funding.
الفلسطينيين المسجلين
The
في
agency UNRWA, and
سجلاتها في
according to
مناطق
its mandate,
جغرافية
that its
5 فقط.
services to be limited only
وليصبح
to
عدد
Palestinian
اللاجئين
refugees
المسجلين في
registered in its
سجلاتها حسب
reports
إحصاء
and in
الوكالة
5 geographical
لسنة
areas only, that the number of
2018 قد وصل
refugees
إلى
registered
أكثر
in
من
its
6
record
مليون
according to the
و100
agency
ألف لاجئ
statistics until the
مسجل،
years
لكن العدد
2018
الفعلي
to 19 reached
تجاوز
more than
8
6
ملايين
million
لاجئ حسب
refugees, but
تقديرات
the
مراكز
actual number exceeded
الدراسات
8 million refugees
وبالتالي
according to most
نظام
studies and
الأونروا
research
الحالي
centers.
بما يشمل ولايتها
Consequently, the current UNRWA system,
المحدودة
including its limited
ومهماتها
mandate,
وطريقة
tasks,
تمويلها
and method of
لم يعد
financing
يصلح
is no longer
للتعامل مع
fit
مأساة
to
اللاجئين
deal with the
المتفاقمة
aggravating
مع
plight of
امتداد حالة
the
اللجوء
refugees,
لأكثر من
with the refugee
72
status
سنة
extending for
وتضاعف
more
أعداد
than
اللاجئين
72 years,
وزيادة احتياجاتهم.
the number of refugees
كما أن الأونروا
doubling
ليست
and their
منظمة
needs
أهلية
increasing.
وليست
UNRWA
جمعية
is not a
خيرية
civil organization
وهي
or a
ليست مكلفة
charitable
بتوفير
association,
ميزانيتها بنفسها،
and it's not
إنما
charged with
تقع هذه
providing its own
المسؤولية
budget.
على عاتق
Rather,
الأمم
this
المتحدة التي
responsibility
أنشأتها،
falls on the shoulders of
والجهود
the
التي
United
تقوم
Nations
بها
that
الوكالة
established it.
تعتبر جهودا
And the efforts
إضافية
made by the
مشكورة.
agency are considered additional,
ومهم أن نكون
additionally
على أبواب
appreciated
عقد
efforts.
مؤتمر يجري
And it is
التحضير له
important to be
من
on the
قبل
verge of
الأونروا
holding a
والأردن
conference
والسويد
that is
في
being
الربع
prepared
الأول
for
من سنة 2021
UNRWA by Jordan and
لحشد
Sweden
الدعم
in the first
السياسي
quarter of
والمالي للوكالة،
2021
ولكن
to mobilize
يجب أن لا
political and
تعفى الأمم
financial support
المتحدة
for
من
the agency.
مسؤوليتها الأساسية
But
في
the United
التمويل،
Nations should not
وكما
be
نعلم فإن
exempted from
الأمم
its
المتحدة
primary
تساهم فقط
responsibility in
في
funding.
3%
And as we
من
know, the
ميزانية
United Nations
الأونروا،
contributes
والدول
only 3%
العربية
of the
تساهم في
UNRWA budget,
أقل من
and this is
7% من
definitely not
الميزانية
enough.
العامة، وهي النسبة المتفق عليها طبعا، وهذا حتما وبكل تأكيد غير كافي.
And this is not
الاستمرار في دفع المبالغ
Continuing not to pay the sums of money in the UNRWA funds will negatively affect not only the economic and social conditions of
والاجتماعية
لأكثر من 6 مليون لاجئ في المخيمات والتجمعات، من بينهم among them about 30,000 employees and half a million students.
وهذا طبعا بنسب متفاوتة في كل إقليم من
to varying rates in each of the 5 regions,
في ظل جائحة كورونا
especially in light of the new coronavirus pandemic. Each region has its suffering and challenges, as we will listen to, and inevitably causes more cases of extremism and exploitation, as will reflect on the security conditions of the hosting countries
وكذلك
and the
سينعكس على
region.
الوكالة نفسها وعلى ولايتها التي ستضعف تدريجيا لتتحول إلى وكالة اسمية في الأمم المتحدة ليس لها أي مهام وظيفية مثلها مثل لجنة التوفيق الدولية حول فلسطين UNCCP. تقليص الخدمات والبرامج وتأخير رواتب الموظفين عبر إجراءات إدارية تتخذها إدارة الأونروا عمليا يمس حقوق اللاجئين ولا يعالج أصل المشكلة أي الأزمة المالية المزمنة. وهنا لابد من التأكيد على أن الوكالة ليست خصما للاجئين وليست المستهدفة بحملاتهم وفعالياتهم الاحتجاجية، إنما المستهدف هي الدول التي تعرقل تمويل الأونروا وتضغط على الدول المانحة لنزع الثقة بينها وبين ونذكر هنا في نيسان 2017 على سبيل المثال كيف تم تعطيل أو كيف عطل سفير الاحتلال السابق في الأمم المتحدة نقاش دعوة الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة غوتيريش كي تكون ميزانية الأونروا كافية ومستدامة وقابلة للتنمو. وعاد المفوض العام للزريني بالتذكير بالتقرير أثناء خطابه أمام اللجنة الرابعة لمقاومة الاستعمار التابعة للأمم المتحدة في أكتوبر 2020 ونأمل أن تنال دعوته صدى وقبول.
As he recalled the address of the first committee for resisting colonization of the United Nations in October 2020, and we hope that this call will be echoed and accepted. First, we confirm that the UNRWA is an international agency with a permanent and non-temporary mandate until the implementation of General Assembly Resolution 194 and UN Security Council Resolution number 237 of 1967, which called for the return of the displaced after the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip in 1967, and the displaced were included in the agency's records. Second, make the basic UNRWA budget to cover programs and services as part of the mandatory country's contribution to the UN fund, provided that the general budget takes into account an annual percentage increase that corresponds to the percentage of the increase in the number of refugees and their needs. I would like to finalize by affirming two questions. The first is that the issue of the defending and protecting UNRWA is part of protecting the rights of the refugees that the occupation is trying to wipe off. The agency is targeting its political with a financial address and will continue even if the Biden administration resumes the American financial contribution that the Trump cut off. There will be improvement, but the financial crisis will remain and the amount of about $70 million, which is the agency's financial deficit for this year, is able to be covered by any donor country. The budget for just one day of the wars that the region and other regions went through is sufficient not only to cover the financial deficit, but to cover the entire annual budget of the UNRWA.
المسألة الثانية
The second issue is that whoever perpetuates the Palestinian refugee issue is not the United Nations itself, but UNRWA, not UNRWA, and the Son.
وبتقديرنا وللتخلص من هذا المأزق
المطلوب
استحضار الأمم المتحدة مشروعية حقوق اللاجئين الفلسطينيين السياسية والإنسانية والقانونية ونحتاج نحن أيضا كفلسطينيين الدفع باتجاه تعزيز دورنا بالدرجة الأولى وعلى كافة الصعد سياسيا وشعبيا وإعلاميا ودبلوماسيا وقانونيا لوضع قضيتنا كلاجئين وبقوة على الأجندة الدولية واستثمار الكفاءات التي عندنا لعدم تجاوز حقوقنا في المستقبل أمام أي موقع أو تحول سياسي في المنطقة وفي العالم. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا لك أستاذ علي هويدي مدير الهيئة 302.
Thank you, Mr. Ali Houidi, the manager of 302 for refugees. Now we'll give you with the word of the manager of Syria,
أمانيا أبي, اللي يتكلم على
to talk about
الظروف التي يعمل فيها في إقليمه في ظل الأزمة المالية الحادة التي تواجه
under the circumstances of the deficit, economic deficit that the UNRWA is facing.
Good afternoon and greetings from Damascus. My name is Amanya Maiko. I'm the director of UNRWA in Syria. I've been in Syria for nearly 4 years now. I have seen the last 4 years and the evolution of the situation in this country. I would like, before I start, to thank you all for the interest in UNRWA and our work and the Palestine refugees. And we look forward to continued support from and collaboration with you. UNRWA in Syria is one of the biggest UN agencies in the country. employing 4,000 staff. And having stayed very active and engaged throughout the period of the conflict, we are about 10 years into the crisis itself. We serve currently about 438,000 refugees in Syria. Before the war broke out, we had about 560,000. A number of them left the country, 27,000 currently in Lebanon, 17,000 in Jordan, and others dispersed across the world. Of those who stayed in the country at the beginning, we had about 60% of them displaced internally. That has reduced to 40% now. And 91% of the refugees live below the poverty line. That's a survey we conducted as a result of the survey we conducted in 2018. The war has had, the conflict has had an impact on UNRWA itself. 44 agency facilities were destroyed. We lost about 29 vehicles. 30% of our schools were damaged. And 3 of the 12 refugee camps where we work were also impacted. Now, this gives you the basis of the challenges we already work with. Now, recently we've had, COVID, which has also brought its own challenges. Currently, we have about 9,000 confirmed cases in the country. We, in the way we provide services as a direct implementer, it is extremely difficult to maintain physical distancing. The refugee camps are quite crowded. We are continuing to provide direct education in the schools, face-to-face education. We haven't been currently making sure that education continues. As a result of COVID as well, we've seen a very grave impact on the population in terms of rising prices of commodities, including bread. We have a fuel crisis in the country, which is little abated, but also now coming back. It's coming to winter. We have these challenges. And also close to 80% of the refugees say that they have been directly affected by the crisis. Against all these odds, our staff have worked together with all those concerned to provide services. I'm very pleased to say that against all the challenges of the economy, of funding, of the conflict, we have been able to prevent the spread of COVID in the country. We have designed innovative programs that serve the refugees. We have currently 51,000 students in 102 schools with a 90% pass rate. We provide very innovative health care, and we have adjusted it to respond to the pandemic, where we are providing telemedicine and distributing medicine to for non-communicable diseases into the homes to reduce overcrowding at the facilities. We have also addressed issues of mental health with the refugees, provided cash assistance and food, adjusted our food to provide blanket food distribution given the socioeconomic impact of the war. Also, through our microfinance program, we've also provided microloans to the refugees and the Syrians to also help them start small businesses, especially needed at this time of the crisis. We are faced with huge challenges. Most among them is funding. Our emergency appeal budget is 28% funded only, meaning that we have only got about 30% of what we required for 2020, and the 70% is unfunded, meaning that we've been forced to reduce the services we are providing to refugees, including cash, including our ability to repair installations, and some of the support we provide to our services. There is uncertainty, as you currently know, with our ability to pay salaries to our staff, which has created a lot of anxiety. And these are staff who have been on the front line providing critical services in a very, very, very challenging environment. The fact that we cannot afford to pay them salaries is extremely disheartening to us as management, but also to all of us still as staff, and to the refugees. This has had a grave impact on the staff, raising stress in an already very stressful environment, and also for the refugees. The challenges of limited funding means that we've reduced services. We currently may be forced to reduce services because of limited funding, and that would have devastating impact on the refugees, especially in the socioeconomic environment in which we find ourselves. And I worry very deeply that if funding was not to come, and it's extremely worrying right now, that this may impact our services, and the closure of services, including schools or clinics, God forbid, would spell disaster to the refugees and the population and their inability to cope. So we want to appeal to the international community through you, and with this partnership, to advocate for UNRWA to receive the funding that we need to continue providing critical services to the refugees, to pay the salaries, but also to make the funding for 2021 more sustainable and reliable, so that we are not constantly looking for funding, that we focus on the work that the United Nations, the General Assembly gave us, that you support us through your advocacy to mobilize resources to fund the rehabilitation of our infrastructure, which was damaged through the crisis. And we also support vulnerable families that may be wanting to return home. It's something that is extremely desirable for these populations. I thank you very much for your interest. I will wait to answer questions later. I would like to ask that I stop here. Thank you very much.
شكرا لك أستاذ أمانيا أبي.
Thank you, Mr. Amania Abiy,
سوريا.
the manager of Syria region. Now we leave the word for Mr. Cordoni, the manager of Lebanon. Mr. Claudio, go ahead.
شكرا انتصار، شكرا أستاذ علي.
Thank you, انتصار.
في البداية أود أن أتقدم بالشكر لعلي وللحقيقة 302 على تنظيم هذا اللقاء بمناسبة الذكرى السنوية
for having this meeting after the
لم يحدث انقطاع في خدماتنا الصحية الأولية، ولم يترك أي لاجئ فلسطيني من دون علاج في المستشفى، ولم يصل مركز سبلين بعد إلى كامل طاقته الاستعبادية. ومن خلال العمل عن مع ممثلي في المخيمات ولجنة الحوار اللبناني الفلسطيني، ساهمنا أيضا في تعزيز الاستجابة الشاملة للأزمة الصحية، ونواصل القيام بذلك على الرغم من الأزمة المالية. لقد تمكنا أيضا بعد بذل العديد من الجهود من توفير تمويل التقديم مساعدات نقدية شاملة لمرة واحدة. المبالغ التي تم توزيعها لم تكن كبيرة، وكان هناك العديد من الصعوبات في تنفيذ هذه العملية، ولكن استطاعت 91,000 عائلة الحصول على المساعدة. على الرغم من الأزمة المالية لم نوقف تقديم المساعدات للمستفيدين من شبكة الأمان الاجتماعي والمساعدات اللاجئين الفلسطينيين من سوريا، وتفاوضنا على أفضل أسعار الصرف المتاحة حتى تكون الفائدة أكبر للمستفيدين. نعتزم النظر في مستوى المساعدة للشبكة الأمان الاجتماعي التي نتفق معكم أنها قليلة.
That I know that I agree with you that it's very short, but we try so hard
لجولة جديدة من المساعدات المادية لمرة واحدة. وسنبدأ قريبا مشروعا تجريبيا لنظام جديد للتأكد من هوية الأشخاص يعتمد على مسح بصمة العين الذي تطبقه وكالات الأمم المتحدة الأخرى. سيضمن هذا النظام وصول المساعدة إلى الأشخاص المحتاجين الموجودين حاليا في لبنان. فيما يتعلق بالتعليم في شهر آذار أطلقت الأونروا برنامج التعلم عن بعد لمساعدة الطلاب على الدراسة في المنزل خلال الاحتجاجات ومن ثم إغلاق المدارس بسبب كورونا. من أجل مواجهة تحديات الوصول إلى أدوات التعليم عبر الإنترنت قدم مكتب لبنان
of reaching education, the office in Lebanon provided internet cards and tablets for the students. Also, the UNRWA provided psychological and social support and educational support to its team, specialized team. The UNRWA now adopts blended education, and we apply social distancing in their schools in accordance with the higher education, Ministry of Higher Education. And we know about the complaints about the lack of teachers and other employees and the shortage of educational tools. And every day we communicate with other institutions about this topic. Here I would like to express my sorrow for our inability
من جمع مدرسة في مكتب الرئيسي هون في بيروت. وقد تمكنا من توظيف عدد من عمال النظافة البيئية وإنجاز أعمال البناء والصيانة في منشآت بفضل مشروع المال مقابل العمل، والذي يوفر فرص العمل لمدة 40 يوم لمئات اللاجئين الفلسطينيين من لبنان وسوريا. ولكن ما يحتاجه اللاجئون الفلسطينيون حقا في لبنان على المدى الطويل هو الحصول على حقوقهم، بدءا من الحق في العمل والحق في التملك. لا يوجد تعارض بين التمتع بهذه الحقوق والحفاظ على حق العودة. سنواصل العمل مع المسؤولين في الحكومة والأحزاب السياسية اللبنانية من أجل تحسين الظروف المعيشية للاجئين الفلسطينيين حتى يتمكنوا من العيش بالكرامة. في الختام أنا أؤكد بأنه على الرغم من كل جهود الأونروا فإن الآفاق والفرص أمام اللاجئين الفلسطينيين في لبنان لا تزال قاتمة وستظل كذلك لفترة من الوقت، خصوصاً بالوقت الراهن مع استمرار الأزمات السياسية والمالية في لبنان. أنا أخشى أن تستمر نسبة البطالة والفقر في الارتفاع، مما يدفع البعض إلى مغادرة البلد بشكل شرعي أو غير شرعي. وأنا أخشى أيضاً من عواقب اليأس والإحباط. على الرغم من الصعوبات المالية الحالية غير المسبوقة، تظل الأونروا ملتزمة بضمان ظروف معيشية كريمة للاجئين الفلسطينيين من خلال الحفاظ على عملياتها. هذا أولاً وقبل كل شيء لأن اللاجئي فلسطين لهم الحق على الحصول على هذه المساعدة، وبذلك ستستمر الأونروا في كونها عاملاً رئيسياً للاستقرار في وضع اجتماعي وسياسي متقلب في البلد. في لبنان لا يوجد اليوم بديل للوكالة في حياة اللاجئين الفلسطينيين، لذلك سنواصل حشد الدعم السياسي والمالي. إن مثل هذا الدعم للأونروا مطلوب أكثر من أي وقت مدى. وشكراً.
شكراً لك أستاذ كلاوديو كوردوني، مدير إقليم الأونروا في لبنان. وننتقل بالحديث إلى السيدة الأستاذة مارتا لورينزو مديرة إقليم الأونروا في الأردن. فلتتفضلي أستاذة.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me well. Greetings from Amman. My name is Marta Lorenzo. I'm relatively new to UNRWA, but I have to say that I am not new to the Middle East, Palestine, and Palestine refugees. I wanted to thank you for inviting me to this discussion today, and thank you to the followers that show interest on such an issue as Palestine refugees. Maybe let me also thank the government of Jordan, because if I look at our context, we host 2.4 million refugees in Jordan. Our work wouldn't be possible without the support of the government of Jordan. And it wouldn't be possible without the support from the international community, donors, and other national and international humanitarian partners, including community-based organizations on the ground. So thank you to all of them. As I told you, I'm relatively new to UNRWA, but as Claudio said, he was talking about rights. And I have to say that I take pride of the investment that UNRWA has made over the past 71 years on protecting fundamental rights of Palestine refugees. And these are the right to quality education, the right to health, the right to a dignified life. I don't think anybody can contest the type of work we are doing, because we are adhering to protect the most fundamental rights anybody can think of. And we are contributing to central pillars of sustainable development goals, bridging the humanitarian and development divide. I heard Mr. Ali talking about temporary mandate, permanent mandate. But what it is true that UNRWA is doing is that we are contributing to bridge this humanitarian development divide. And in a context that is always subject to political upheaval, what we do is people-centered. We are not here to talk about politics. We are here to protect the very rights of people. And our work over the past 71 years could not have been achieved without the biggest asset that UNRWA has, and this is its staff, which in Jordan is over 6,900 people. I cannot tell you what it is to feel the stress and anxiety that our staff feel when they don't know when and whether they will be fully paid or partially paid. This is something that frontliners, particularly in times of the pandemic, should never, ever hear it. In my short presentation today, I will focus on why UNRWA services are vital for Palestine refugees in Jordan. I will briefly mention COVID responses, but I don't want to say much more than what my colleagues have said. And I will also briefly speak about challenges and opportunities we are facing in 2021. Here in Jordan, we are operating 25 primary health centers and 169 schools. So if I look at achievements last year, 1.6 million people went to our UNRWA consultations, and over 119,000 children are registered in our schools. When someone looks at Jordan, we tend to look at it as a context that is stable. But the fact is that this is no longer valid. The Jordan context probably didn't have conflict as we have seen in other field offices. But what we see is that the socioeconomic situation has been aggravated by COVID, intensifying socioeconomic fragility and inequalities amongst the most vulnerable. And these include Palestine refugees. And let me share with you a couple of key highlights over decades of our operations. We have gone a long way. At the first influx of Palestine refugees in the 50s, the agency started mass distribution with basic items like flour, rice, fuel. By the late 70s, we moved to cash subsidies. Now, we are supporting people with cash-based transfers. That's using a more dignified approach that gives people the choice on how they want to spend the money. This is not something unimportant. Yesterday, I was visiting in Baka camp, one of our social safety net cases, who told us that this allows them to pay electricity or water bills. Microfinance services, they started in 2013. Now we are providing more than 12,000 loans. We are talking once again about self-reliance, dignified lives that do not contradict the right to return, as my colleague Claudio has mentioned. Our approach to health is patient-centered. Through our family health teams, we prioritize long-term provider-patient relationships and quality of care. We have recently introduced innovations and efficiencies such as the e-health system and mobile applications. These are working beautifully, and much more so in times of the pandemic when people cannot access clinics. And I don't need to explain to you why education matters, and more so in a context of protracted displacement. Every year, 10,000 students graduate from our schools. This is probably the more powerful tool we can provide to future generations. We know that the quality starts with education. Our focus is not only knowledge. We provide spaces for students to think critically and interact with other students and the community. And in Jordan, the same as other field offices, we are responding to the changes in our context. And these are mainly the Syria crisis and COVID-19. There are 17,500 Palestinian refugees from Syria. And of course, COVID-19 is affecting both Palestinian refugees, Jordanians, and others alike. This includes, when we talk about the most vulnerable, who do we mean? We mean mainly Palestinian refugees without Jordanian citizenship or facing legal status issues. And these are many of them Palestinian refugees from Syria and ex-Gazans who fled Gaza to Jordan during the 1967. We provide them with cash-based transfers and support them with other emergency needs. During this pandemic, we have seen that the most vulnerable are also women and children in particular, because they are further exposed to protection-related risks. We have established gender-based violence hotlines, and we are strengthening our referral system. I think this is indicative enough of why UNRWA services to Palestinian refugees are vital and critical. And let me tell you that when I first joined UNRWA, the first activity that I ever did was to go with the Commissioner General to one of our schools, Al-Nusha. And we met with a child who told us that her biggest worry at the time when we were implementing blended learning, so not all children were at the school, her biggest worry was not COVID. Her biggest worry was not to get infected. Her biggest worry was the rumor she had heard that services might be interrupted and that she had no school to go to. Hearing this leaves us with no words. And I have also met, as part of my introductory meetings, Palestinian refugees from Syria who feel extremely frustrated because our emergency cash is based on what we can afford to do and not what the needs are. I think this is important to highlight. Our June survey showed that 90% of Palestinian refugee respondents did not have enough cash to sustain their family for more than 2 weeks. I think this statistic is alarming enough. I'm not sure I should be going into what we have been doing in the COVID-19 response. It's very similar to what other colleagues have mentioned. I think our priority has been to make sure that our services, whether they are health, education, relief, camp improvement, infrastructure, replacing schools, etc., continue. We haven't stopped not one day in providing services, and we have adapted. But adaptation and innovation comes with a cost. For example, blended learning initiatives are more expensive to run them. But do we have any other choice? Do we want to leave Palestinian refugees behind? We have to remember that our curriculum in UNRWA schools in Jordan is exactly the same curriculum as the one of the government of Jordan. And we do not want to have different standards for different children. Maybe something else that I wanted to mention is that in terms of the pandemic is that needs have not remained the same. We have noticed, for example, that we need additional teaching personnel, including temporary staffers, to be able to meet quality standards and adjust to a more unpredictable context where people and teachers get sick. And unfortunately, we lost 2 of our teachers. And we need to be agile. And one cannot be agile when our resources are constrained. For example, this pandemic and long-term closure, we know is having a significant impact on students' physical and mental well-being. And we also know that the pandemic has created a big technological gap. 32% of our children do not have access to internet or tablets or any other devices. But we do not have the agility to be able to address this gap. In closing, let me address briefly some of the challenges that we are facing. As Palestinian refugees in Jordan are entering the 5th generation, what I would want to stress is that challenges have become multidimensional and much more complex, including poverty, protection risks, and concerns around the legal status of Palestinian refugees in Jordan. Demand for UNRWA's core and emergency services is increasing. Mr. Ali said it at the beginning of his intervention. However, financial resources are at the levels of years ago, while our financial needs have increased. If we want to protect these years of investments in human development, and I want to highlight the word of human development, what we need to do is ensure that responses are inclusive, comprehensive, and coordinated, leaving no one behind. This requires not only additional financial resources, but also integrated approaches which UNRWA within its mandate cannot address alone. No single agency can address these multidimensional needs alone. And of course, we have to strengthen partnerships to help and sustain past investments in essential sectors and address new challenges. These partnerships need to be built based on the principles of complementarity and equal access to services for all. And last but not least, the Palestine refugee crisis is protracted, and UNRWA's core costs are absolutely predictable. We know what our services cost. They are unlikely to decrease without this impacting negatively on the quality of the services that we are providing. This is something that Amani and Claudio said. While we continue adjusting our programs, including innovations, and making the money go further, we need predictable and sustained funding to prevent any shocks in service delivery to Palestinian refugees while continue investing in our staff. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer questions later on. Thank you.
شكرا لك أستاذة مارتا لورينزو مديرة إقليم الأردن. أعطي الكلام الآن للسيد ماتياس شمالي مدير إقليم الأونروا في غزة. تفضل أستاذ ماتياس.
Thank you very much, Dr. Intisar, and let me, like other colleagues, start by thanking Ali Uwaidi and the Association 302 for putting up this seminar. With greetings from Gaza, let me also give a brief outline of what UNRWA does here. And maybe the first point to start with is just the simple size of UNRWA. We are the only of our 5 fields where the majority of the population are registered refugees with UNRWA. So out of the 2 million people living in Gaza, at least 1.4 million are refugees. So UNRWA has responsibility as per its mandate for 70% of the population. And that then means in terms we run 277 schools. We have 13,000 staff here. And sometimes people, when they hear that, they say that's typical UN, a big bureaucracy. But in fact, if you run 277 schools for 287,000 children, you need teachers. So 9,000 of our staff roughly are teachers, are school principals, are education specialists. We run 22 health centers, and each quarter alone, there's over 1 million primary healthcare consultations that take place in these health centers. So we are arguably the biggest primary healthcare provider in Gaza. And it goes without saying, if any of these services collapsed because of UNRWA's financial crisis, the impact would be huge for the 1.4 million refugees, of course. It would be very negative for the stability of Gaza. You would have 287,000 children without education at home or on the street. And it would be bad for the stability of the region. We truly are, in these terms, through our massive service provision, a factor of stability. Secondly, let me briefly touch on the recent few months in terms of COVID. And like my three colleagues have already outlined, in Gaza too, we've adapted rapidly, we've innovated, and I think it is a major success that our services have continued despite lockdowns, despite movement restrictions, despite the financial crisis. And to highlight a bit, ever since the local outbreak of COVID became clear or known at the end of August, day 2 after this became known, we continued sanitation services, cleaning the camps. We very quickly adapted our massive food operation. We provide food to over 1.1 million people. So that's a huge operation. And in the second quarter of this year, we adapted this operation because of COVID and brought food home to all 1.1 million people. That was a massive effort, and many, including WFP, have looked at this with amazement. Like other colleagues have talked about, our health centers have provided telemedicine, have taken medicine for the non-communicable disease patients home. And what may be important, and this shows how, while we're not on the front line in the COVID response, we play an important part in fighting COVID. We have, in emergency periods, put our primary healthcare services also to non-refugees, just for the emergency period. So this is not a widening of the mandate. This is an agreement with everyone involved, including the host authorities process. And every month they bring the filled-in education materials back to the school. The teachers collect them and mark them and give them feedback. And of course, delivery of school books and the collection of learning materials is all done in a COVID-safe manner. And as Marta has spoken about, this costs extra in terms of cleaning materials, security, and public health safety. And then finally, in terms of also saving a bit of time, I would like to, like my colleagues, echo that this is about far more than a financial crisis of an institution. Of course, as staff, we are particularly worried about this. Sometimes staff feel, I think, that we as management single them out when we start talking about we cannot pay salaries. But the fact is, the staff are the service. So for me, there is no separation there. Our service is teachers teaching. Our service is doctors treating people who have illnesses. So we are not talking about cutting salaries. In fact, if we do not have enough money, our big cost item of service provision is the salaries. And that's why that is so much in focus. What we are really talking about is that we would not be able to provide services. And that, as all my colleagues have spoken about, creates huge anxieties amongst staff and amongst the larger refugee community. And maybe as a final thought on this, in terms of echoing again that this is not just about the survival of UNRWA, but it is about the question of Palestine. When our Commissioner General visited recently for the first time, a prominent civil society activist said, for us, UNRWA is the question of Palestine. Everyone has to understand that. And if you want to solve UNRWA's budget problems, you have to create a just solution. That is the way to solve this. And as I often say, I would love to be the last UNRWA director in Gaza, not because we are out of money, but because we are no longer needed, because Palestine refugees have a place they can call their home and return to. Thank you again.
شكرا لك أستاذ مات الشمالي مدير إقليم الأونروا في غزة. نبقى الآن مع الأستاذ سوني جاتنتز نائب المديرة بمنطقة الضفة الغربية ليتكلم عن التحديات التي تواجه الأونروا في ظل هذه الظروف الصعبة. تفضل.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me and for hosting us tonight. And of course, to everyone who has linked in to this webinar, it's a great honor to be able to speak to everyone and hopefully also get some questions. I'm sorry about my name. It can be a bit of a challenge to pronounce it, but I think you did very well. So thank you so much for that. I'm the deputy here in the West Bank office. Our director, Gwyn Lewis, is away at the moment, so she entrusted me with the task. And I'm, as I said, very happy to be here. I really can only echo what a lot of, or what my colleagues have said before me. Of course, there are differences in context. The West Bank is not like Gaza or like Lebanon or like Jordan. But of course, in the end, we are one agency and we have one concern. I think Matthias said it very, very well, that UNRWA is much more than an agency, than a refugee agency, and therefore the financial crisis of UNRWA is much more than the financial crisis of a UN agency. Like in the Gaza Strip, UNRWA in the West Bank is servicing a very large percentage of the population. Around 270,000 refugees live in our camps, in the 19 camps that UNRWA is serving, out of approximately 850,000 registered refugees in the West Bank. What's important to remember, of course, is that aside from the mandate, and this is again back to what my colleagues were saying, UNRWA is really also part of the fabric, right? We, like elsewhere, those that deliver the services of what UNRWA does are people from the camps, of the camps, and they are refugees themselves, many of them. We have around 4,000 staff working in UNRWA in the West Bank, that aside from, of course, spending their time on providing services to people in real need, themselves, of course, also inject economy into the West Bank, help with the development, etc. And if you imagine that this agency was going to stop providing services, of course, aside from all of those that depend on the services, we would also then suddenly see a huge injection of cash into the economy that would go missing. So again, it is one of these very rare agencies that does so much more than just what's in the actual mandate. And we really can't forget that. And I think that's across the fields, even if they are all different from one another. We, of course, provide the same kind of services in the West Bank as being provided elsewhere. Predominantly, it's around education to children. So we have around 40,000 students. We have 46 schools that we are servicing, so not quite the same numbers as in the Gaza Strip. We provide healthcare to refugees that are registered. Most of the healthcare services are provided through our health centers, but we also run one hospital in Kalkilia that services the community and has been there for a really long time. We provide relief services to those that are the most poorest amongst the refugees. And of course, in addition to that, within the camps themselves, we provide environmental services and garbage collection, solid waste management, etc. And then I think, again, also we have to recall that the situation in the West Bank is very much a situation of a protection crisis. With the ongoing occupation, UNRWA provides a presence and a service, a protection service towards people there by having teams on the ground that observe what is going on, that register what is happening, the protection, the issues that the refugees are facing with the occupation, be it through settler violence, be it through demolitions, or be it through incursions into the camps by ISF. The fact that UNRWA is there helping to provide at least testimony and witnessing what is going on is extremely important, particularly at a time when protection agencies in the West Bank are rapidly decreasing their presence for various reasons, including visas, etc. So it is really critical. We've seen, as many of you I'm sure are aware, quite an increase in the number of violent incidents between settlers and refugees and West Bankers in general. The number of demolitions in the West Bank are at an all-time high. And generally, the level of incursions into the refugee camps remains also very high, with civilian casualties, etc. So once again, we had to recall that this is not a stable context where UNRWA is providing services until there's a political solution. It is an ongoing context of conflict, of tension, of violence, where people live and try to exist. And on top of that, of course, we've seen COVID, as is the case everywhere. And COVID has provided just a tremendous amount of additional challenges to people's livelihoods in the West Bank, whether you live in the camp or you live out in the communities outside. And as elsewhere, UNRWA has had to think on its feet, to adapt and to adjust and to improvise so that we could continue the services to the people in the camps. And this has been our priority this year. We have deviated from all our grand thinking about plans and ideas to just making sure that we can continue the services, that we could get the children back in school after the summer break, that we could continue the healthcare services in Kalkilia Hospital or the healthcare centers, to make sure that even if we, like everyone else, are affected by COVID ourselves, our staff, that we can continue to provide these vital services to those most in need. So we have done that, and I say with quite some pride, we managed to get and maintain the children back in school since September, when the schools opened again. We have had to constantly adapt to the PA, of course, and to their direction. But our main focus has been to keep our schools open as much as possible, bar the occasional closure because of infected staff or infected students. But we have managed. And that, of course, in itself is, I would say, a tremendous achievement, because it provides a degree of stability and continuity to these tens of thousands of children and their families that are already going through an extremely challenging time because of COVID and the general circumstances. So that's been one of our main focus. At the same time, we've also acknowledged that we need to adapt to the situation and increase our service level within healthcare to make sure that we can reach those most in need that may not be able to move around as much, partly because of closures, partly because, of course, they may all themselves be extra exposed to infection. So we have upped our ability to provide mobile healthcare services, for example, and reach out to communities rather than them coming to the health centers. And we will continue with this. I'm not going to go through everything that we have done, but I would just say, like my colleagues, that this year has been one of having to think on your feet to make sure that the services do not stop. And then on top of that, we, of course, have the financial crisis of the agency, which I think is a financial crisis that is very well reflected in the world. It's not just UNRWA that is going through a financial crisis. The United Nations in general is going through financial crisis. And we have to remember that going into 2021, it's not just about bringing money to UNRWA. There are millions of people in need around the world. and everything has to be put into context. That's not to diminish the importance, I think, of UNRWA, but it's just to remember that there are a lot of people who are dependent on humanitarian and development services around in the world, of which, of course, the Palestinian community is a significant chunk. In the event that we fail to raise money, that we fail to get out of this hole, it will, of course, have impact on our services, however little we want it. There's no doubt that it would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to maintain the service levels that they're at now if we don't have the money to do it. So that means that our healthcare centers will have to be affected. It means that our education services will be affected. It means that we will have to prioritize who amongst the children should not go to school, who amongst the healthcare centers, or which amongst the healthcare centers should have diminished services, who amongst those that are the poorest of the poorest should have their cash assistance taken away. These are the kinds of decisions that we will have to face in the event that we don't manage to raise funding. And of course, it's not just for 2021, but it's also beyond, until there is a political solution. So again, we are going into a really difficult time, and I think we have to be really honest about it. We have to rely on each other's abilities to advocate and to reach out and to try and convince the donors and others how important this is, because it is important. But we can't pretend that this is going to go away, because this is a long-term issue that has to be solved for a long period of time. There has to be predictability in the funding to UNRWA. We can't just go on month to month, year to year. We need much more financial visibility and predictability than that. Thank you very much. Again, I will end it there, and I hope that there are questions for us, and I look forward to them. And again, thanks for having me and in this distinguished panel of UNRWA colleagues.
أكيد شكرا لك أستاذ سوني، نائب مديرة إقليم حضرة المدراء الكرام، أود أن أطرح عليكم بعض الأسئلة. لقد وصلتنا أسئلة عديدة حول عملكم، لكنني اخترت سؤالا لكل إقليم من الأقاليم، فأرجو أن تجيبوني عليه. أود أن أوجه سؤالي الأول إلى الأستاذ أمانيا آبي، مدير إقليم سوريا. أقول، أو السؤال الذي سأطرحه والذي وصلنا هو: هناك تحديات كبيرة أمام الأونروا في سوريا، ومن أهمها العمل على عودة اللاجئين الفلسطينيين إلى
registering people. The governor visited I believe on the 8th of November, and they've started registering people with the possibility of them returning to the camp in the coming near future. Now, on our side, we have been discussing with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Governor's Office, and the GAPAR, the General Administration for Palestine Arab Refugees in Syria, asking that our priority would be to rehabilitate our installations, schools, clinics, and community centers, if the refugees are allowed to return. Now, we also need the government to install water, electricity, sewage system, which were damaged, and also to allow the refugees to come and approve that and announce it publicly. On us, then we will then be able to invest. Now we are still waiting for the government to make that very formal. The return process seems to be underway. We understand from the municipality, the governorate rather, that a budget has been allocated for water, sewerage, and electricity. And we when that is all formalized, we will certainly launch an appeal on our side to raise funding to rehabilitate our own installations. We are already providing services inside Yarmouk. 3 days ago, you may have seen, I posted something on Facebook today. We have provided food and non-food items for refugees inside Yarmouk. We are providing health services inside Yarmouk. So we are already serving people who are in Yarmouk right now. And we wait for others to return, the infrastructure to be repaired, and then we will use all these conditions or changes to raise resources to rehabilitate our installations and support refugees also to rebuild their livelihoods. Over.
شكرا لك أستاذ أمانيا. أوجه سؤالي الآن إلى السيد كلاوديو كوردوني مدير إقليم لبنان في الأردن في لبنان عفوا. بالنسبة للبنان قطاع التعليم من القطاعات المهمة. يشهد اليوم هذا القطاع تراجعا في الأداء خاصة بعد التعليم المدمج الذي يجمع فيه عدد كبير من الطلاب مع ضعف في الإنترنت وعدم توافر الحواسيب مع جميع الطلاب. كما يشهد هذا القطاع اليوم تقليص في عدد المعلمين والاستغناء وطبعا بحسب ما يذكر بسبب الظروف المالية التي تعيشها الأونروا. ما هي الخطوات العملية التي ستتخذونها إزاء هذا الأمر؟ تفضل أستاذ.
شكرا. راح أجيب بالإنجليزي إذا ممكن أسهل عني. So the question, sorry, there was an interruption, but the question is about how we're dealing with the online teaching and so on in the current circumstances. So at the moment we are employing, and we first of all we need to identify how many teachers are going to be how many students are in our classes, because we had many times the school started and stopped. We have we need to see who comes to the classes and who logs in online, so that we can have a definite number of students. We know that this year we got more students than last year, mainly because many people have left. They may have been in Lebanese public schools or in private schools, and they came to us because they can no longer afford being there. But we don't know still exactly the number of students. However, we have started the year. We have more than 1,400 teachers, and we're getting ready to add to these numbers those that are needed, despite the the financial crisis that we have. This is again because we don't want the crisis to impact on our services. And so even though we are not there yet, we have about maybe 50 teachers that are missing. We are working to ensure that takes place. And you heard me speaking about the program of learning support that we're trying to rescue. And I hope that in the coming days, after many contacts with many donors, we may be able to have some good news in that respect. Unfortunately, as you know, the situation in the camps or the situation in houses that are overcrowded anyway makes it very difficult for children to be able to learn online. This is why we try to provide additional devices to some of the families. We still have plans to do that, but it remains a very difficult way to learn for anybody, even in rich countries, let alone in refugee camps. So, in short, basically, we are making every effort to make sure that the service, the education service, is maintained, and that we have all the teachers we need, and that hopefully we can move away from this COVID restrictions. Although I'm afraid that I think this school year will still be dominated by, at best, this blended approach rather than having people going back to school as they should. Thank you.
شكرا لك أستاذ كلاوديو كوردوني مدير إقليم لبنان. سؤالي إلى السيدة مارتا لورينزو بالنسبة للأردن. تعيش الأونروا في الأردن أزمة مالية تؤثر بشكل كبير على خدماتها المقدمة للاجئين الفلسطينيين. ما هي الطرق التي تساهم في تجاوز هذه المسألة أو هذه الأزمة؟
This crisis, or to go through this crisis?
Thank you for this question. I think at the very end of my intervention, I mentioned that challenges for Palestine refugees have become more complex. This is with or without UNRWA's financial crisis. So I would say that even if we didn't have the financial crisis that we are seeing right now, my answer would probably be the same. There is no single agency that would be able to address these challenges alone. So we have to build more partnerships. And we know that we have sister UN agencies that are complementing the work we do. We know the essential role of the government of Jordan in the provision of services. I'm just going to give one example related to the pandemic. As we have seen since September, a growing community transmission, we have advocated for the expansion of PCR testing in Palestine refugee camps. This is now happening. So soon we will be having PCR testing in Palestine camps. This is something that is not within UNRWA's mandate. We are not prepared to do it, but through a very strong partnership with the government of Jordan, we will be able to do it. As we are preparing for vaccination against COVID-19, that partnership is going to be needed as well, and we will be part of three areas in which vaccination centers will be done through UNRWA clinics. So I think that's very important as just one example, but not the only one. If we look at, for example, how to address poverty, we know that the social protection systems have their limitations, that there are many more challenges than just being able to pay basic needs, that there are protection challenges for families that have children with disability or women-headed families. We need others to support us and to be able to refer those cases so that they are treated in a holistic manner. And we need to do it faster and better. So I think that is very, very important. And then what would help us manage the crisis is to use the different funding mechanisms that we have in place to use them the way they were designed for. As I mentioned in my previous intervention, we know what the costs of running our education system are. We know that we need over 4,000 teachers. So this is predictable. What it is not predictable is needs related to COVID-19 and emergency cases to a certain extent for Palestinian refugees from Syria have become more predictable. But one would argue that it is unclear what this would cause. So for that, we have emergency appeals. So we encourage our donors and supporters to use the right mechanisms to be able to address the different needs that the agency has. And part of the needs are also replacing very old infrastructure or rented infrastructure. I visited one of the rented schools of UNRWA in South Amman, and this is not acceptable to have children learning for years and years in rented premises. So of course we need investments in infrastructure that eventually would help us save money, because the moment we stop renting premises and putting children in the right adequate spaces for education, we will not only improve education, but we will also save costs. So thank you. I hope that answers your question.
شكرا لك أستاذة مارتا مديرة إقليم
Thank you, Ms. Marta, the field manager of the UNRWA in Jordan. Now I bring my question to Mr. Matthias Shahali.
بالنسبة لغزة غزة تعيش تحت خط
Gaza is living under the poverty line for the majority of its citizens.
هناك ضعف في الاستشفاء، انعدام الخدمات الطبية الضرورية تحديدا وخاصة في ظل وباء كورونا. فما الخطوات التي ستتخذها الأونروا في هذا المجال خاصة كما قلت في ظل أزمة COVID-19
as you have mentioned under the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think Our priority remains, as I think all colleagues have talked about, to keep our basic services going. So that is to keep education going, to keep our primary healthcare centers going, to keep our massive food operation going, and to provide sanitation. I think that's the biggest contribution we can make. And as I outlined earlier, in emergency periods, we also provide services to non-refugees on that primary healthcare side so that the hospitals can concentrate on the COVID-19 response to everyone. So that's one bit. I think a second bit, and that's where this afternoon's webinar is important, is advocacy. You know, the reason things are so bad in Gaza, including the reason why the hospital sector has collapsed, basically, in terms of its infrastructure, is that we are in the 14th year of blockade. You know, so we need to advocate with the international community, not just for, of course, in the medium to longer term, or as soon as possible, an overall just solution, but to lift the blockade. People do not need to be unemployed here. If the blockade were lifted, we know that many people would find jobs, would be less dependent on UNRWA and the international community. So I think we really together need to raise our voices in both the medium-term perspective of a just solution is needed, but Gaza specific, it is about lifting the blockade. You know, in my first or second week here, a bit more than 3 years ago, a senior advisor of mine, a Palestinian, said to me, we all know this famous Chinese saying, it's China, that it's better to teach people how to fish than to give them fish. And he said to me, and that stuck with me, in Gaza, we don't need to be taught how to fish. We know how to fish. We need an opportunity to fish. And I think that's out very well. Thank you.
شكرا لك أستاذ ماتيس.
Thank you, Mr. Matthias. Now my question is for Mr. Sani,
مدير إقليم الضفة أو نائب مديرة الضفة الغربية. تواجه الأونروا تحديات التنقل عبر حواجز الاحتلال لموظفيها ولطلاب المدارس على وجه الخصوص، بالإضافة إلى التهديدات الدائمة من قبل الاحتلال بإلغاء عمل وكالة في شرق القدس المحتلة، وأن هناك تدخلات في السابق من قبل بلدية الاحتلال في مخيم شعفاط واقتحام عيادة باب الزاوية التابعة للأونروا من قبل الاحتلال. ما هي خطة الأونروا للحد من تدخلات الاحتلال في شؤونها في الضفة الغربية بما فيها شرق القدس المحتلة؟
including the work in the East Jerusalem.
Okay,
by the
thank
occupation.
You. Thanks. Look, for us, the priority remains to ensure that kids can go to school, and if they can't go to school for one reason or another, then they can continue their education at home. We are currently, especially in the West Bank, we are very much following the PA's instructions and the PA's guidelines. And if children are blocked from going to school because of lockdowns, etc., we, as was also said from other colleagues, we will very much continue the best we can to expand and provide opportunity for blended learning, for distance learning, etc. And of course, it's a challenge for everyone because it means that you need to have access to internet, you need to have access to devices. And this is something that we are working with our donors to make sure that that we can grow the number of tablets available to children, grow the opportunity for children to basically do online learning, but hopefully also blend it with an opportunity to come to school occasionally so that they can see each other and they can meet with the teachers and have in-person learning. That's our priority. The ongoing issues around Shufat and the ongoing issues around East Jerusalem, this is very much also an advocacy aspect. We are working within the bounds of our own, but also, of course, working to ensure that the children have uninterrupted education in these areas. In East Jerusalem, we have to follow the Israeli instructions, and we have done that so far when it comes to lockdowns, etc. And we need to make sure that the quality of the education is as good as it can possibly be. We are not trying to compete with Israeli schools in East Jerusalem or elsewhere. This is not our job. Our job is to provide education to the children that come to our schools and to do it the absolutely best we can with the means that we have, and then constantly trying to adapt to the changing circumstances. So this is really our priority, and as others have said, it continues to be a challenge. It's of course a challenge when we have people around our compounds that try to take them over or try to interfere the best that we can. And that comes down to then us negotiating and advocating with the authorities so that we can continue providing the services that the children are entitled to from the locations that are UNRWA's locations. So that's how I see it. Thank you.
شكرا لك أستاذ سوني. أشكر جميع المتحدثين.
Thank you, Mr. Sani. I thank all the speakers.
الأستاذ أمانيا أبي سوريا، الأستاذ كلاوديو كوردوني من لبنان يعني مدير إقليم لبنان، الأستاذ مارتا لورينزو الأردن، الأستاذ ماتياس شمالي غزة، الأستاذ سوني بودنتس. شكرا لك. لكن قبل أن أعطي الكلام للأستاذ علي هوادي مدير الهيئة 302 سيتم طرح سؤال على الحضور. أرجو التفاعل معه. أترك الكلام لك أستاذ علي.
Mr. Abid to give the questions of the audience.
أستاذ علي.
Mr. Ali. Mr. Ali.
أستاذ علي الصوت عندك ميوت أنت. أستاذ علي.
الصوت واضح؟
هلا واضح. قبل كان تعامل صامت أستاذ علي. أترك الكلام لك في نهاية هذه الندوة.
At the end of this session.
هي طبعا هي كلمة شكر لك دكتورة انتصار على إدارة هذه الندوة، والشكر لمدراء الأنوروا الخمسة الأفاضل على مشاركتهم ومداخلاتهم القيمة. وأكرر السيد أمانيا مايكل أبي من سوريا، والسيد كلاوديو كوردوني من لبنان، والسيدة مارتا لورينزو من الأردن، والسيد ماتياس الشمالي من غزة، والسيد سوني بادنتز، ونائب السيدة جوين لويس مديرة عمليات الغرف الضفة الغربية. والشكر على ما قدموه من ثروة من المعلومات والتوضيحات التي حتما سنعمل على تعميمها لأوسع شريحة ممكنة. وأعتقد أنها قد أجابت هذه الندوة على جزء كبير من